Welcome to the Second Bite Podcast, where we talk with top entrepreneurs and CEOs about creating valuable companies through creative transactions. Now, let's get started with the show.
Okay, we are back at the Second Bite Podcast. I've got a great guest with me today. Ben Landers is here from Blue Corona. Ben, so happy you're here.
Yeah, Todd, thanks for having me. And I should say formerly from Blue Corona.
But that's a great intro because we're going to jump right into that. So let's, the transaction was 5 years, was what year?
We did it it consummated October 2021.
Okay, so 2021. Let's go wind the clock back just a little bit. At the time, you're CEO of Blue Corona. What does Blue Corona do and who do you do it for? I was co-founder and CEO, and we were a digital marketing technology company working mostly with home services companies. And we would help them increase sales and reduce their advertising and marketing costs and differentiate their brands online. Digital marketing technology company, sort of verticalized on the home services space, although we had clients that went beyond that, the core home services industries. You were an early group to verticalize, if you will, right? Because back in late teens and 20s, people were digital marketing agencies, and that was unique and cool. And then gradually people got more focused and today are more focused oftentimes in verticals. How was that intentional? And what were the benefits of doing that?
I sort of an interesting path to get to where we got to. Before starting Blue Corona, I worked for a home services company, bottled water delivery company called Drink More Water that was, in the Baltimore, Washington metro area. And I should say half of their clients were homes and half were commercial. So it was both B2B and B2C. And so Blue Corona, in one sense, sort of launched out of that business. The founder of that business, a guy named Bob Perini. Bob was an engineer by trade, Harvard MBA, financial guru type. And so he was meticulous or wanted to be meticulous about tracking all of his advertising and marketing expenditures to see what is really working and what can I eliminate. That engineering brain of like, I don't want to spend a penny that isn't producing something. And so when we launched the business, it was sort of, my first initial target. I sent a case study for what we had done at Drink More. I sent that to 100 bottled water delivery companies. This big direct mail, is like a 30-page case study, full color, bound. An interesting side story, the printer, I took it to a printer and I said, how much would it cost to print this? And he said, what are you doing with this? And I said, I'm going to send these across the country. And he was like, you're an idiot. This is a marketing company. You should send postcards. It would cost peanuts. And I'm like, no CEO gets their own mail. No small business owner gets their own mail, right? Someone gets it and drops it on their desk and they pre-sort it. So all those stupid postcards get thrown away. I want a box where when they open it, the secretary won't throw it away because they think this is probably like a present for the boss. And when the boss opens it up, if they have anything resembling a brain, they're going to flip into it and say like, oh my gosh, this guy has tracked all these advertising strategies for a company just like mine. I got to call this guy and kind of figure out what the deal is. That printer is out of business. And Blue Corona is,
what it is today.
Story. So I had, out of the 100 sends, I think I initially had 8 bottled water clients. And then one of the before we even started the business, I had some interactions with the owner of a plumbing company. And I was sort of telling him, I said, hey, I do all the advertising and marketing for this bottled water company. And, what are you guys doing with the yellow pages? Because we're tracking it and the leads are going straight down. The cost per lead is through the roof because the reps haven't adjusted the ad prices. What are you doing? And he says, well, let me call my VP of marketing over here. He calls her over and he says, what are we doing with the yellow pages? And she said, we're doing 2 full-page color ads, which in the DC market is like a $20,000 a month.
Super expensive.
Maybe more. And I said, we've canceled everything.
we're at a bold listing. And she was like, that is crazy. How could you possibly do that? We hear what our competitors are doing from the rep. We look at our budget and we try to just do a little bit more than the competitors. So I reached back out to the plumbing company when we had the business, and I say, hey, remember that conversation that we had? Like, what if there were a way to track all this stuff? And so anyway, we had early on, we had a whole bunch of home services clients, but we also had like Rockville Harley Davidson. I knew the owner of Batley Cycles, Rockville Harley. They were our neighbor where our office was. And so I had them as a client. We had Adventist Healthcare that came from a high school. A buddy of mine was their like chief information officer. And, he sort of saw on Facebook what I was doing, as a company, and said, like, I don't think we're tracking anything. I had sent the case study to a bunch of bankers, like the folks at Capital Bank and some other business banks. And they circulated it to clients that they knew were spending a lot on advertising. So Len the plumber, banker, sent him the case study, and he reached out. So anyway, we were probably 60%, maybe 65% home services, and then the rest was everything under the sun. And then what happened was in 2014 or 2015, and I had always wanted to sort of verticalize. But my business partner, who was an investor in the company, the guy from Drink More Water, never worked for Blue Corona, but it was like an advisor, mentor. And he was anti verticalization for a whole variety of reasons that too long to get into. And so he was just more expansive. He always wanted me to think more expansively. And so I remember, though, we were almost acquired in 2014 by a client, a guy that I had signed up one of his companies. I thought it was the only company he had. I went to visit him as a time killer meeting for a Chicago business trip. And the sales rep who sold him said, this guy owns a $3 million commercial kitchen repair company. It's super small. I don't know if it's worth your time, but it's right by the airport. It's right by Midway, and you go right to your flight. And I go meet with this guy, and I pull up expecting a light industrial, building. And instead, it's this townhome that like a law office would be in. There's one car in the parking lot, okay, in this little office building. And it's a Porsche Cayenne Turbo S, like a $200,000 SUV. And I thought, what in the world is this? And I go in, and it's like beautiful mahogany everywhere. And I met the guy, and I said, Bill, what is this? I mean, I thought that you were a commercial kitchen repair company. And he opens up this file cabinet drawer with like 100 folders. And he goes, these are all my companies.
Wow.
And you've signed up this one. And I was like, oh my gosh.
Light bulb went on. So now
anyway, he almost bought the company. And when he was meeting with our executive team, he was a huge 80-20 guy, right? The Pareto principle.
Yep.
And he said, have you ever looked at your customers through the lens of what percentage produced the bulk of the profit? So we did that analysis, and we were like, oh my gosh, Adventist, sexy client to have, big brand, Harley, sexy client, big brand, completely unprofitable accounts because of the level of specialization. And, we had one guy who understood HIPAA analytics and stuff like that. So
Right.
At that point, 2014, we were like, you know what? We're going to just kind of keep going all in on the home services side.
So then you get a knock at the door, right? And on the past episodes, for those that are interested at Second Bite Podcast, you can listen to John Morris. You can listen to Mike Perez, who got a knock at the door and did a transaction with that group and are very happy with the result. Take me through the process. When you got the knock at the door, did you feel like you should do something bigger and wider? Walk us through that, if you will.
So there's a lead up to that, which was that I was getting, knocks at the door from about 2013. We started the business in 2008. we were on the Inc. 500 list or the Inc. 5000 list like 9 times in a row. So, you know, there are companies that all they do is source off of the Inc. 5000.
Right.
So I would get calls from, you know, big media companies and printing companies and search fund, you know, guys running search funds. And I really started taking those calls probably in 2016 after our failed transaction with our client. I was like, you know what, I could probably learn a lot just about how people look at our business from the outside and how they value companies like ours. I mean, you and I had some conversations over the years about, you know, multiples. And so I started taking those calls. So, but all of the, you know, multiples that we were hearing were like, I would say on the search fund side, it was like really, you know, 3 to 5.
Yeah, with a bunch of structure.
With a bunch of structure that was never discussed. And most of them didn't have the money. They didn't have committed capital. It's like, you know, they had to go then sell the idea to the group. And then on, you know, more like the printing company, big printing company was trying to get out of the printing business, more into the digital marketing space. The multiples were maybe like, you know, 5 to 6, 6 to 7, probably more like 5 to 6. So then all of a sudden, you know, I start to decide, you know,
and Ben, let me interrupt. Did you, in a conversation, could you get to that number that they were thinking about, 4 to 5 or 6, or did it take multiple calls to get there?
Well, with, you know, the beauty of like them calling you and not being for sale is, you know, I generally think of myself as like a pretty, you know, friendly guy and, you know, engaging. And, you know, in some of those calls, like with search fund guys, it's like, look, you worked at Bain Capital, you got your Harvard MBA. What the hell do you know about my industry, my business? And just tell me a ballpark valuation and we can make this like a very quick,
right?
Okay, I'm interested. You know, no, I'm not. Because I already don't think you're the guy, you know, who can run my company and grow it. So sometimes on the first call, the printing company in question, that was actually a company, that was the reason I was in Chicago when I met the guy who ultimately almost acquired us. And that took multiple conversations. They had a banker, an investment banker, who sort of did like, as I was like playing hardball, at one point he just did sort of a nuts and bolts look. You know, this is how we value your business. No one's going to pay more than this. You're lucky to be here. Like,
and do you remember what that multiple was?
That was like the 5 to 6 is what it would have worked out to be. I mean, one of the things that's a little bit tricky, I think, for entrepreneurs, and maybe this is a place where you add a lot of value, is multiple of what, right? So you'd hear this thing like the printing company was saying, we're going to average the last 3 years of EBITDA. Yeah. And I'm like, well, that's stupid. Our company is growing like a hockey stick. So why would I do that? Other companies would say, oh, we'll take the trailing 12 month and kind of run it out. And so, you know, I would go home on a spreadsheet and like plug all our numbers in, and I would do like, you know, and then there are all the adjustments like, all right, am I backing out my salary? Do I have to stay on? I've hired ahead of capacity. Do I zero all those people out? You know, and every buyer, my sense is that, you know, the small search fund people and the non, you know, like the printing company, those folks may not be, you might be able to like do some maneuvering with those guys. If a big PE firm that's rolled up, you know, like the big players in the industry calls, and you're thinking like, all right, I'm going to get them hooked on this multiple, and then I'm going to back out all these, you know, costs. It's like they know the game better than you know the game.
They absolutely do.
The entrepreneur.
Yeah, and it's also, you know, you have had with Blue Corona a very good, very profitable, very desirable business. And there's others that are less so because of the metric, because of the space, because of whatever the case may be. And search funds fill a role. Search funds are terrific for the right type of company, you know, from that standpoint. So, and you will also find that most buyers think about value similar to their value. If a print company trades at 5 or 6 times, they're not going to pay you 9 times for your, I mean, it dilutes the value that they have.
Yeah.
Right. So
we actually had that as an actual statement. Another group, a much bigger group, private equity backed, that I'll keep their name out of it. You and I both know them. Group out of New York. I took a train up to New York. We had some preliminary conversations, and they had sort of like, I remember part of the CEO's like pitch for when he arrived at like a final number was our business, which is way bigger than yours, trades at this multiple, and like, our debt covenants won't allow us to pay, more, some like,
yeah,
I remember getting back and telling Bob, business partner Bob, yeah, that guy said, like their debt covenants wouldn't let them pay more than, X for our business. And Bob just starts laughing, and he's like, you should have like made a wise Alec remark. And I'm like, well, I don't even know what a debt covenant is.
And as I like to say, yeah, your problems are not my problems, right? But let me ask you this: when you were having these conversations, did you know in advance that you wanted to be a platform for private equity, or did you know you didn't want to be a platform and you wanted to tuck into a built-in infrastructure and management team?
I don't know. I always think about this, and I could be retelling history, but I don't think that I am. When I was working for Bob at the water company, I went to work for him because he had launched multiple businesses sort of out of the water company. Most of them were beverage related, but in my interview with him, it was like, hey, we could start all sorts of different business. It doesn't have to be related to bottled water industry. And so I was always sitting down with Bob and brainstorming like business ideas that we could start. And everything did start with the number. Like Bob was like, how much money would you have to have where you would never work again? Bike, golf, whatever. And at that time, I think it was $5 million. I was young, I was dumb. Inflation wasn't what it is today. And I said, if I had $5 million, I'd be good forever. And he said, okay, mine's 10, but we're close, type of thing. And so I remember then quickly thinking like, I should up, I should make my number 10 too, because 5 is probably too little. And so when we start, every business that we were thinking about was always reverse engineering to getting that number, either getting it through the distributions or getting it from a transaction, knowing that the odds of a transaction in private small businesses are pretty low.
Right.
And so to go back to sort of your question, I was always thinking I need to walk with at least 10. And again, the number kept creeping up as I got older. I had kids, et cetera, et cetera. But I need to walk with a number after taxes, free and clear, where I'll be financially independent. And if I'm financially independent, if there's a role for me to create value in the go forward and I feel like it, great. But the idea would be that if I get that, I'm out and I'm going to gallop off into the sunset. And so everything for me, it was less about even, the multiples. Like I think I said in a previous podcast interview that, we didn't have an earnout. The original iteration of the deal did not have an earnout. And on that number alone, I was like, if we can get this done, I'm good. And then we ended up through sort of the negotiation and how long it was taking, we exceeded every target we had given them. And it's like, okay, I'm sure they factored, some like plus or minus onto what we gave them. We're way above that.
And that's with Everservice?
Yeah. And this is taking way longer than the original LOI for a bunch of different reasons. And so there was a negotiation of like, hey, let's put something in place where if we continue on this trajectory that we're continuing on, we're getting like a kicker. So essentially a contingency.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to think about an earnout, is that it is a kicker. It's extra money right, that you get for. So let's go back to October 21 is when you close the transaction with Everservice. And in conversations you and I have had in the past, you had said that you thought it was a perfect transaction.
Yeah.
Can you talk about why that was?
Yeah, one being, sort of not being for sale, them approaching us, and we were approached almost simultaneously by two different parties. So
we had a little bit of sort of like a stalking horse, a little bit of a, we had some optionality. And so, that made it perfect. The fact that organically, we weren't trying to sell the business. I just hired a CTO. I had a president in place. I had a head of finance. We were firing on all cylinders. Had just upgraded the office space and were upgrading our technology. And so
you were getting the bounce back from COVID.
Yeah. I mean, it took longer than I would have liked, but I mean, it was sort of like we had our table set. I remember telling whoever, whether it was one of the folks from EverService, I remember saying, look, I'm living in my dream house and we're putting in a tricked out pool in the backyard. And like, I'm going to keep putting the pool in, whether we're talking or not. So again, if you like it, put a number in the mailbox and I'll think about it. But I love this house. And all that was true. I mean, it was really true. I wasn't burned out. I wasn't, crying to Bob every night, like, oh no, the business is getting too hard. It was great.
So then what if, because a lot of guys and women think about this, a lot of founders think about this. You're happy with what you're doing, to transition to either not doing anything or doing something with a different group of people.
Yeah.
What caused you to make that transition in your mind, number one? Number two, on a scale of 1 to 10, how much did the actual dollar amount, the money, impact that decision?
Well, I mean, the like I said at the beginning, when I started the company, it was like, I want to try to get to a number. I want to be financially, free. I grew up, my father was a government employee, Air Force, then Department of Energy. My mom was a Catholic school teacher. So I had everything that I needed growing up and probably everything that I wanted. But growing up in Montgomery County, Maryland, affluent area, you're surrounded by people who just have gobs of money. So I guess my whole life there was this, I want to have that. I want the beach house. I want all the stuff. Come to that. We'll come to the flaw in that thinking later. But so the number was the first piece, which is like, gosh, if I get this, yes, I love the business. Yes, I'm excited. But you do get in this weird conundrum of like, I do love business like a game, but I've got like kids that are now, in middle school, high school. I've really spent very little time with my family up to that point. I mean, I was working 24/7. So, and then like I had a 401k in like a handful of stocks, but all of my net worth was in the company.
Yeah.
And so, of course, like COVID showed all of us that like shit can change.
Comes and goes quick.
Real quick.
When you were making that decision, Ben, did you think I'm going to go do something else after some period of time? Or were you like, nope, this is enough. I'm going to be retired forever?
I thought I would be retired forever. I mean,
did you really?
Well,
you were how old when you sold it?
That's a good question. I'm terrible with mental math.
I was probably
46, 47, 46, 40. Yeah, something like that. 45.
All right.
Yeah. I mean, look, I was a semi-professional cyclist up until 2006. I got hurt. I couldn't ride at all. Couldn't do much of anything. That's when we started the company. So work became my sport.
Yeah.
In 2020, I started biking again in a different capacity. But if you told me, hey, the rest of your life, you're going to wake up, have your coffee, read, hang out with your wife, go bike for 4 or 5 hours, come home, take a nap, read, go pick up your kids, and then hang with your family like the whole evening. You've just described like my Zen, sort of life.
Okay. And so this was a great opportunity to get that. They knocked at the door.
Yeah.
Then it took a lot longer. What was causing that?
Well, that's an interesting question because I'll tell you what I think from our side. You may be able to figure out what the actual truth of it was. So the company that ultimately acquired us was in the virtual answering service business. So you call the plumber on the weekend. You think you're talking to Len the plumber. You're actually talking to the answering service. And so their, I think, thesis was, hey, we want to be synonymous with growing small businesses. we have this answering side now where we're helping companies capture what they would have missed by bolting on a digital marketing lead gen, component. We can add to that, create more value. To me, that made a lot of sense because we were actually we were recording all the phone calls, for our clients and showing them, hey, this CSR has a 90% close rate. This one has a 50% close rate. What are we doing here? And so we sort of thought it was a natural synergy. So when they came along and they said, well, you'll become like the platform and we're going to acquire other digital marketing companies, just like we've acquired other calls answering businesses. And, but we want to do let's look and find some clients that we have in common so we can kind of talk to them and we can sort of
sell them and all like that.
And let's do some cross-selling. So you sell to some of our clients and we sell to some of yours. Now, one of the downsides, or what we started to realize pretty quickly, was their clients skewed very small. And so one of the things that we talked about early in the purchase kind of due diligence was could we design a package that's $300 a month instead of the Blue Corona average client, had gone from $1,700. And then when I hired Mike Wilson to run sales and marketing, it went up to $3,500 a month. So it was we're selling Cadillacs and you want to figure out could we sell lower, a Chevy somewhere? And I remember all the guys that I had in my Vistage group, my YPO group, I was in all these CEO groups. I kind of with confidentiality, I sort of told them hey, I'm being asked to do a cross sell. And 5 guys in the group are say no, don't agree to that. But I was so confident in our team and our service that I was sure, yeah, we'll do that. But it ended up that. Those were dragging on. We're going back and forth with proposals. And they had put in the LOI, if I remember correctly, it was very we're going to offer this price, we're going to close on this date. And that time period was much shorter than anyone we'd ever seen.
So then what's typical there is 60 to 90 days.
It was, I won't give, the exact.
It was less than that.
It was tight. Yeah. And so again, the people had experience on our team, Mike, his previous company had been acquired. And he said, there is no way, we'll be lucky to close it by the end of the year.
Yeah.
It was well, this is what they're saying. So what happened was as the cross-selling started kind of dragging on and the diligence, they're going through diligence. When you're running a fast-growing company, I had a dedicated exec team, but just filling the data center with all the requests, it was taking us a while to get certain things back to them. Or to explain. We were quick getting stuff in, but then they would say can you walk us through this? And can you walk us through this? And, and we were anonymizing information. We didn't release
client names and such.
Names. And so we had all this coding system and then we had to sit there and be all right, let's make sure our coding system is
correct. It's a piece of work.
Yeah.
One thing I did want to ask you about. So first of all, a little side note. You had talked about having one offer, and fortunately you had another one, so you had a bit of a stalking horse. We talk about how we went through the process with Mike Perez.
Yeah.
So for somebody listening that wants a follow-up to if you have a knock at the door, how you get immediate pressure on that, listen to the Mike Perez episode. Just go to secondbitepodcast.com and then put Mike Perez in the search bar and you'll get it there. When we were talking before, you had mentioned to me that you guys had always had a small in-house guy.
Yeah.
And so
on the legal side.
I'm sorry. Yes. On the legal side. And so you started the process with him and then you had to make a change in the middle. Can you?
Yeah.
And I'll tell you what, we was talking to a client, a gentleman the other day, and they had a 15, 18-year attorney, in-house counsel, always gave him great advice, was probably okay, but overwhelmed by just the flow of work. He's a solo practitioner.
Yeah.
What was your experience like? And on the legal side, what advice would you be sure to give somebody thinking about a transaction?
Well, and I love aspects of life that are open to a lot of interpretation, and all of this stuff is. So, people listening need to
sort of take this through. This is coming through, my lens and what I think, and it's hard to know the actual reality. But we had an in-house kind of fractional, attorney, kind of a mutual friend, and he was fantastic. I mean, all through growing the business, fantastic. And when we started the transaction process, he had been a guy at a huge private equity firm doing deals. So on the one hand, it was like, we don't need to go hire a big fancy law firm because the guy that we have has done like hundreds of deals. He was literally the GC at a huge investment, company. So we're like, he's seen it all. So, and on the one hand, as I think about, one of the things that I think I told you was like when we got the securities purchase agreement, the first set of like markup from our side, I would say was extremely light. And there are a lot of different ways to interpret that. One way to interpret that was there wasn't that much in it that was really worth fighting about because of the numbers that we were talking about and our excitement about doing the deal. So I think one view is that our in-house guy looked at it with that lens and said, okay, they want to get a deal done. Is there anything in here that's like really problematic? Okay, like mark this, send it back. Now, we had a group of my family and employees had purchased some of Bob's shares like in 2019. Well, one of my family members was an attorney at Skadden Arps, big law firm.
One of the biggest.
And they are also known, I think, for being,
they don't have
aggressive guys.
Yes.
Yeah. So he looks at the draft that's been marked up and he's like, you kidding me? Like we didn't send this back, did we? That kind of thing. And so, but what the real trouble with having, I think, a solo practitioner versus a big brand is the reaction and the dynamic that it was creating with the buyers. So the buyers had a name brand firm, not the biggest, not a small one, like a mid-level regional firm where, they're showing up to calls with like 4, attorneys, the lead guy who's, sort of like slick and then his like minions. And we got one guy.
Yeah.
And it literally becomes a pissing match and you can't believe that it's happening. I mean, you think to yourself like, and our attorney, Todd, has an MBA. So he's an MBA and he didn't go to like rinky-dink law school. He went to a top school.
Sure.
So, I'm sitting here like watching these like probably some mid-level, entry-level attorneys like nitpick at stuff. And I'm like, what is happening? And at one point, we sort of like me and Bob had a conversation. I had a conversation with the guy, the shareholder was an attorney, and it was like, all right, we're going to bring in an additional deal guy who was with Pillsbury. And, again, I don't know that much about law firms. I knew Pillsbury because I had a buddy who worked there. But the minute the Pillsbury guy, he marks up the thing that they've already seen, which is not ideal. And he sends it back. And the minute they saw the at Pillsbury, the whole dynamic changes.
Like,
hey, nice to meet you. It was almost like they were interviewing the people in the car, like this could be like this guy's a partner.
You would think that the law dictates, just like you said earlier, Ben, you would think that our EBITDA times the multiple gets us the dollar amount, but there's a lot more nuance to all of that.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And people work on assumptions. And oftentimes the assumption is if it's a solo guy or a small guy, if it's a guy that hasn't done transactions or is not an M&A attorney, what people will learn over time is there's a really big difference between someone that does M&A, can do M&A, and an M&A attorney. An M&A attorney only does one thing, and that's deals. Mm-hmm. And the other guys do a whole bunch of different things and can do that too. There's a very big difference.
It was the first time in my life that it almost reminded me as if like 2 realtors showed up to sell your house the guy that knows the neighborhood back and forth, knows your house, knows your goals, but pulls up in like a Honda Accord. And then like the other guy who pulls up in like an SL 500 and, you know, in a $4,000 suit and has like, you know, the whole package. It was the first time I'd ever seen that where I literally thought, you got to be kidding me.
Yeah.
But this is really happening with like this at stake. So
yeah, and
I would say to the people listening, you know, if you have an in-house person that you're comfortable with, it just from a, I mean, it really is pretty like superficial, but having like a big gun in the room completely changes the dynamic. At least it did in our situation. And
what I would say, Ben, is for those listening, at least interview 2 others, and so that you'll know them and they'll know you. And if you got to turn to one at some point, they'll remember that. One of the things I like about moving on for a sec, one of the things I like talking about guys that have done a transaction a while ago is the perspective that they now have. Because as you talked about on the legal and you talked about on some other things, I am sure that you worried about some things. Turns out you never needed to. And there were maybe other things you overlooked that you should have spent more time on. Can you share some of those with us?
Yeah, I mean, again, I really think we had as close to a perfect, transaction as possible. And part of that is that I don't, like, again, there were some aspects to the SPA, that we spent a lot of time talking through.
Can I pause you one sec, Ben?
Yeah.
I think my experience is there are personalities to firms.
Yeah.
And Everservice is owned by Sunstone Partners. Gus is the lead partner there. They have a personality as a firm that says we will create wealth, not by squeezing a little bit more out of Ben at close, but by all the great things that we can do together, right? And so their attitude, and I've been on some calls with Gus, are just like, get the stuff done, let's go.
Yeah.
How big of a role do you think that played in it looking back being a perfect transaction?
I mean, I think it played a huge role. And beyond Gus, the guy that was, sort of the guy behind the transaction was a guy named Parker Davis. And, Parker,
wonderful guy, by the way.
Yeah, he was the CEO and then the chairman, or maybe he was the CEO and chairman of Nexa, which was the virtual answering service. And I remember Parker sort of early on sort of making it a point that, he's like, look, my reputation is everything. And so these deals don't happen if after the transaction, I can't use you as a reference. And pause everyone there, said stuff like that, but
because they went on to buy iLawyer, Mike Perez's company.
Yeah. And
you had a conversation with Mike, and part of it is, are these guys good guys? Will they do what they say, and will they stand up behind their deal?
They did everything they said they were going to do, and then where there were things that they'd agreed to, like, for example, we were rebuilding our kind of software, our technology, and we had a budget. And I remember early on saying to, our attorney and to Bob, like, should we add that back? Should we say we don't need to re-platform? It's fine the way that it is. Let's take this, $1 point something million and back it out. And I remember Bob, was very principled and was like, look, we are running the business as if we're going to be keeping it for the next 10 years. So no, we're not backing it out. Like, that's what we're investing in. And as I wasn't, once the transaction happened, I was no longer in the executive team. But what I had heard from the executive team was, I was really afraid they were going to buy it and then cancel that whole thing, fire our CTO.
Pocket the money themselves.
Yeah, and they didn't. They put more in than what they were supposed to, and they made our CTO, after an initial, like, probably them trying to get to know him, became the CTO of the whole, the whole kit and caboodle. So, but going back to the things that I worried about, I mean, these are like maybe a little bit more on the personal side. I worried a lot about, like, when I get this, this liquidity, when I get this money, like, what am I going to do? It's, everyone was like, the taxes.
you have to structure things to minimize the taxes. And I spent so much time talking with people about taxes and structuring. None of that was relevant for me. None of it. I mean, our financial setup is very simple. Maybe I paid more than I should have. I could care less. I mean, it was something that I worried so much about, and it really was not, not a big deal. In terms of like what should I have maybe focused a little bit more on? I think, the messaging to friends and family. I mean, when the transaction happened, I didn't say anything other. I mean, I think I told my parents, hey, we've sold the company.
What about clients and all and employees?
That was all very well orchestrated. We told, early in the diligence process, we told the executive team, and then a couple days later, we told the management team, which was probably like 10 to 15 people. And then every week we had a call where members of the management team were encouraged to come to this, virtual Zoom with all the questions they thought their team would have once we announced it to the whole team. And I mean, we literally, and this was sort of orchestrated a lot by Mike, where Mike was like, look, I've been through this. These people are freaking out. They're all going to be panicking, and we need to over communicate. And this is how we do it.
One great comment I've heard from a few people there is that when you run a shop about your size, people are not going to bring their concerns to you. They're going to bring them to whoever that report is. And those are the people that need to have comfort and confidence and information, because that's how it gets downstream to your folks.
Well, yes. And you have to appreciate, we had a person on the team, again, I'll keep it anonymous, but her previous company had gone through a transaction where the buyer said, we're going to keep it just like it is. They do the deal and then, riff everyone and sort of clean house. And she kind of came to us and said, I've been through this. I know this is what they're telling you. I respect you as a leader. I believe you. They're lying to you. And kind of navigating that, we were lucky in that we had a very, think we had a very strong culture. We were sort of open book management from day one. So there was a high degree of trust with, I think, all employees, but especially
And by the way, all of those are things that happen in a deal, right? It's not necessarily always a smooth landing.
Yeah.
And that's not something you could ever anticipate or ask somebody or plan for, right? So if looking back now, I'll have this be my last question. For founders today that are listening now, that are thinking about doing a transaction in 26 or in 27, what advice would you give them? What are the top 3 things you would tell them that are important?
Well, I mean, I think if you're thinking about it, you need to think through that decision through a couple different dimensions. I mean, it's maybe 3 or 4 different dimensions. There's the financial consideration. Can you afford to sell the business? What would the transaction look like? Does it leave you in a place where you're, financially independent, or do you need to kind of be part of the go forward? I mean, all of that would factor in. I think there's the dimension of strategic readiness, like you and I had talked about. There's prepping a business to be sold, and that's one school of thought. Who might acquire us? What could we do to make it more valuable to them? There's another school of thought, which was what we did, which was let's build a great business, outsized value to clients, great environment for employees, growing, rapidly, great brand, great reputation, and kicking off, a lot of profit. And there will always be someone who wants to buy it. But I think, like you and I had said, or you had said earlier in this conversation, if your company's not growing as fast, or you've had some bumpy years, kind of thinking through what could we do to polish this thing before we bring it to market. So the strategic side, there's the emotional, the part that I didn't spend enough time on is the emotional sort of readiness. like to your point, like, did you really think you were just going to do nothing? I mean, I did. It's proving to be more difficult than I thought of. And maybe the biggest thing, which I used to laugh when CEOs would come into these groups that I was in and say, I sold my business, I got $40 million and now I'm depressed. I would between laugh and scoff, like, give me a break. Okay. Right. It's such a first world problem. But who am I without my company? Because if you're 24/7 in the company and all your friends and family know you as Ben, CEO of Blue Corona, Ben, Blue Corona, Ben, digital marketing guy, Ben, and all of a sudden that goes away, it is very weird. And you don't want the identity with anyone to be, and this certainly not me, but with larger numbers, you could see, oh, this is my rich friend, blank.
There you go. Yeah.
Terrible identity.
So
spend some time like really thinking through those in a structured way with an advisor, or on your own, and really think about it, because I scoffed at all that stuff, the emotional readiness. I was like, you got to be kidding me.
So it's 4 or 5 years later. Yeah. Where have you matriculated to? What are you doing today?
And in one sense, I've gone through a couple phases. I mean, post sale, I literally was, sort of living my dream life. I mean, I was recreating all day, reading, spending time with friends and my family. I mean, it's just incredible. And then I started to get physical injuries from exercising too much.
Yeah.
I'm close to 50 now. And, I started kind of realizing that, if your hobbies involve like, some level of physicality, it's a little bit different than like Warren Buffett and Charlie, where they kind of say, look, our business requires us to sit on our ass and like think and read. Mm-hmm. That's a more sustainable hobby than like extreme sports or, downhill skiing.
Right.
And so I think what started to happen was, as I got hurt and couldn't spend all day basically playing, then all of a sudden I'm sitting inside going like, all right, if I can't go and play golf every day and bike all day, I need another sport. And I really do think business is a sport. So making investments in companies where I can, be an advisor, or have some, advisory type role, and doing that kind of thing. But there's one other weird thing that no one likes to hear. I used to hate hearing it, is as soon as you have the, well, at least for me, as soon as you have the money to do whatever you want to do, I think if you're wise, you start to sort of differentiate between like status stuff and like stuff that you really like. And if you can eliminate all the stuff, the statusy stuff, and really focus on what you like, then you get this horrible like hopelessness that it's like, I could buy anything I want. I don't want anything. So what's the point? Like, what is the point of?
Yeah, there's a whole process to go through. It has been and is super helpful to hear it from somebody that's lived it in a very thoughtful way like you have. So thank you for sharing. It's the easiest way to track you down, Ben, would it just be to find you on LinkedIn?
Yeah, LinkedIn is a good one. I respond to direct messages, and I also have just Ben, BEN at aheadofnext.com.
Ahead of next. Got it. Both of those will be in the show notes at secondbitepodcast.com. Ben, it has been terrific to have you on the podcast. So thank you for that. And best of luck. We'll keep in touch on whatever's coming next.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Todd.
Thanks for listening to the Second Bite Podcast. We'll see you again next time. And be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.